So it's been about 9 months since the launch of the 17 series, and today we're going to figure out my long-term experience of the iPhone 17 Pro Max and the iPhone Air, and which one is the better overall pick for you after using these phones for nearly an entire year. Well, let's start this video by talking about the brick versus the feather. So this is all I could think about for the majority of my time with these and switching between them and reviewing both of them over this period is one phone is just a brick, and we know which one that is. It is a soft, smooth, and very vibrant brick. It is the iPhone 17 Pro Max, and you feel every bit of this size each and every day. And because they went up from like 6.7, they went back to aluminum, heavier battery, this phone definitely feels pretty much like a brick most of the time. Now, once you get used to it, most people are going to be like fine with it and not really care. But let's be real. Once you pick up an iPhone Air, you know, if you're into a lightweight, smooth and thin feel, there's really no going back. Most people would say that when they try an iPhone Air. They're going to be like, I can't believe I was using a phone that heavy, because the difference is substantial. It's nearly it's quite a bit, 165 grams to 233. We're talking close to like 70 grams right there. So it is a big, substantial difference. And what is also substantial is the actual choice of material. So we do have titanium on the Air versus a aluminum build on the iPhone Pro Max. Now, funny enough, even though the iPhone Air is a thinner phone, lighter phone, it's actually easier to grip, and that's because these edges, while they do get smudgy, the titanium polish definitely feels kind of grippy, and the corners are a little bit smoother, I feel like, on the iPhone Pro Max, and this aluminum just feels slippery. It's just the way it is, so you're likely going to drop this if you're not rocking a case on the iPhone Pro Max. So that's my take on these after several months. This phone just feels kind of like a brick. It's a beautiful brick, but it's a brick, and this one is a feather. And so that's kind of the thing. Now, I have had times and scenarios where I'm using the Air, and I literally am checking my pockets frantically. And I kind of miss having the heavier phone, because it kind of like freaked me out for a minute, like I lost my phone. But then again, I realized, no, it's there. It's just super, super light. And something else about this phone, the iPhone Air, is that even though it's like super thin and light, it still feels big. So I kind of wish it was a little bit smaller, if I'm being honest, like maybe like 6.3 inches or maybe 6.1. I think it would have been a showstopper at that size as well, but it would have been concerning with the battery there. So when it comes to the displays, they both are rocking the ProMotion displays, and they both are basically the same brightness and resolution. However, one of them is bigger, and that's going to be the Pro Max, as is pretty evident to see right here. You're talking about a 0.4 inch difference. Now, when you see it on paper, you think that's not a big deal. 6.9, 6.5, that's not a huge difference, but in reality is a pretty big difference. The iPhone Air doesn't feel small, but by comparison to the Max, it does kind of feel a little bit small. But it's kind of a sweet spot for those of you who think that the 6.9 is too much of a reach, it's too big. But funny enough, even though this phone is a 6.5, it's still kind of a reach up there. So again, I kind of wish it was a little bit smaller. That's just my take. But both are at 460 pixels per inch, so the actual sharpness of the text is going to look exactly the same. Now, they're both the same smoothness, and they're both actually the same peak brightness, so that's good for outdoor usage. They also have the same aspect ratio, so that means that they're both the same width. So reading content is not going to appear bigger on either of them. It's just going to be more space on the iPhone 17 Pro Max over here. But other than that, both of these phones do tend to give you that anti-reflective coating, so they're both going to be pretty good in that sense. And so really the choice here just comes down to the size, 6.5 or 6.9. I personally think that the 6.9 is probably the better pick here, because if I'm already going to be kind of uncomfortable with the 6.5, might as well go up to the big guy and get the 6.9, because to me this size is kind of like still not very one-handed friendly on the iPhone Air. It's definitely more than the Max, but at this point I'm like, I'm just going to go to the big phone, because the contrast is not as big as like this to a 6.1 inch phone, which feels a lot more one-handed friendly. All right, guys, so let's talk about the single speaker scandal. I call it a scandal because, you know, it's basically one of the main cons a lot of reviewers have found. I've talked about it as well. I have seen some comments saying it's not a big deal, Personally, as someone who uses both, I can definitely tell the difference at the highest volume. That's because I'm analyzing both closely. But one thing about it I will say is that the single speaker is actually pretty good on the iPhone Air. It's very loud. It comes out the top. But at the same time, the reason why it's brought up is because the price of the iPhone Air and the fact that we haven't had a single speaker phone in an extremely long time. And it just seems like they could have probably found a way to squeeze it in somehow, but it just wasn't there. At the end of the day, it's not the end of the world for the iPhone Air, but it is something that is mentioned quite a bit. I still like the Max because I like dual firing speakers for that bassy and loud punch at the highest volumes, but the Air still gets the job done. It really does. So it's not the end of the day. Let's talk about the 2-day king versus the 7 to 8 p.m. panic on the battery. So what do I mean? Well, the iPhone Pro Max is definitely going through 2 days. I find it regularly can get me that far. On this phone, yes, I am going to be pretty low by the end of the second day, but the fact that I can even do that on flagship beasts like this is really impressive. They've been that way on some older iPhones like that 13 Pro Max, but we had some years where the Max wasn't really giving us that. They're back with this one. So over 5,000 milliamp hour. This is actually a higher capacity than the Samsung Ultra. I do love this. Also, this phone charges faster than any iPhone before, and so does the Air. Charges pretty good as well. But the Air just is that phone that's going to last you a regular day. You're going to be low by like 7, 8 p.m. at night if you're a heavy user, and you're charging this boy every night. It doesn't matter. So that's the price you pay for the premium thin build, the light build. You just got to pay attention to battery a little bit more. Is it the end of the world? No. Does it get through a day? Yes. A lot of people say, oh, it's so bad. No, it's not that bad. It gets through the day. It's not the end of the world. But the iPhone Air is going to be a 8 p.m., 9 p.m., you're getting pretty low. That's the facts. That's what I've seen. Now, the Max, though, this phone is no sweat. You don't even think about the battery. You're like, okay, well, I forgot to charge it last night. I still woke up at 43%. I'll charge it this afternoon at 10. So, yes, you can still go that far. It's not a great charging habit. I tend to still try to charge it as frequently as possible. But it's not something I worry about if I forget. And that's a really good feeling with the Max, and one of the reasons why I tend to use this one more than the Air. Ergonomically, can you use either with one hand? I don't think so unless you have big hands. Honestly, I have big hands. The Air is easier to use one hand because of the grip and also because it's shorter top to bottom, but it's not a pleasant or easy one-handed experience. It's still doable, but you gotta have some big hands. Now, the iPhone Max can be one-handed again if you have big hands. But once you start typing, you are going to be using this right here, this feature, where you can bring the keyboard over quite a bit because it's still a two-hand type. And the same over here. You can swipe. It's a little bit easier to get across on the Air. Again, if you have big hands. But I think for most people, these are still big phones, both of them, in terms of screen size and just overall size. So ergonomically, I would just pick whichever one you like more because really the Air is not substantially better one-handed just because of its height. You can see it right here next to the Max. It's almost the same height. It's only just a slight bit shorter than the Max, and that's what makes a big difference. And also because of their non-narrow aspect ratios, which I do like because they show a lot of content, they're still pretty wide phones. So that means side to side is a reach. So when it comes to performance, the iPhone Max is the winner just simply because it doesn't throttle as much. They both have the A19 Pro. They're both clocked at the same speed, both have the same RAM, but the Air tends to stutter a little bit more frequently if pushing the phone a little bit heavier. It's not a big deal, but for gaming is the real issue. If you want to do gaming, I think that the Air does fine, but if you want to do it like more sustained for a longer session, the iPhone Max. So I just go Max if you're doing heavy camera or game. That's really the big deal with performance. Other than that, they both do fine. I will say thermally though, the Air can get toasty up in this region if you push this phone a little bit hard. So other than basic use, so the iPhone Air definitely less comfortable to hold when it gets toasty, but it never gets too warm. Kind of reminds me more of like a 16 Pro. That phone also got a little bit warm, but nothing like a 15 Pro. So not a big deal at the end of the day. But the iPhone Pro Max is really like super impressive in thermals compared to most phones on the entire marketplace. So long term, when it comes to the camera, we already know the very clear, obvious things about these. The zoom differences, but in reality, it just really comes down to your usage case. They both have the same front-facing cameras, which is really nice. But when it comes to their rear cameras, you really have to think about their zooming abilities. I found that I do use the zooming a lot on the Max, even for regular stuff in daily life. So I do think it's worth it if you do like to zoom. Also, that dedicated macro mode is really nice on the Max. Also, we do have a little bit more video stuff. And if I'm doing something more substantial with video, social media, I think it's worth the investment on the Max. Bigger screen for editing those photos and videos after. Better battery life for rendering on that phone if you're trying to do it on the go. But the Air is just super good as well. Like, it has 4K 60, it has really good video and photo, and it forces you to take good photos because you don't really have a ton of zoom. That's going to be like, you don't have an ultra wide, so you're going to be taking a lot of good photos because it is just purely going to be mostly the 1X. I personally think that this would have been much better with 2 cameras on the iPhone Air, which hopefully the next one does have, but it's not a deal breaker. At the end of the day, this is definitely my least favorite of the 17 lineup when it comes to the cameras though. So 17 Pro Max all day for cameras. When it comes to durability, I actually prefer the Air. Surprisingly, you would think because it's so thin, it's going to bend and stuff. You'd be wrong. This is extremely strong, extremely well engineered, and the phone itself just doesn't bend or anything like that. Also, the phone itself is titanium build, so it feels a little more sturdy on the edges than the iPhone Max. And while at first you might feel like it's delicate because of its lightweight, I assure you this phone is not delicate. Also up here, this area is pretty well protected. You still are going to need a case because of how it comes off the edge. But this is going to be like sapphire glass on there. So you're going to be pretty good even if you didn't use a case on this phone. So this is a pretty strong offering. We are going to have the glass on the front in both of these. The iPhone Max though has this aluminum that's just soft. I try to keep it in a case most times. I've already dented it right there. You can see that drives me a little bit insane right there because I dropped it and it was in a case, slipped out, and still dented it right there a little bit. But at the end of the day, this is not the phone if you're going to use it without a case, because if it drops, you're going to have all these little aluminum dents on this phone. So I don't love that for the Max, and I kind of miss the titanium build. But it does help with thermals, so it's more function over aesthetic beauty, if you will. And I'm going to introduce a new category I'm going to call the flex factor. So which one do you pull out and you're flexing a little bit more between these two? And honestly, it's the Air. The Air is the phone that's conversation piece. Everybody knows what this is. They see it, they're like, that's an iPhone Max, like whatever, iPhone Pro. They see this, they're like, what is that? You know, there's still people that don't really pay attention all the time. I say, single camera, super thin, is that an iPhone right there? Yes, it is. You're going to get more questions on this phone. Oh, you got the Air? You got that phone? Yeah, this is the one. This one's got the flex. It's got the talking points. However, you could say the cosmic orange because it's the latest color is also a flex. But it's still, the Air is getting more conversation right now. So let's be real about that. You definitely going to get people asking a little bit more about this phone than this one because this is newer and more innovative. So yeah, long-term experience, who should buy right now? If you're going to be waiting for iPhones, clearly you don't need to get any of them right now because we're only a few months away. But if you're going into summer, you're like, nah, bro, I'm ready. I'm going to buy a 17 finally. I don't care about upcoming similar 18 Pro series. I know it's going to be very similar. As an owner of both, I think if you never want to think about charging, you're okay with a brick in your pocket, the iPhone Max is the superior device. It has the smooth feel. It's got a really great battery life, very good camera system, very good performance, bigger display, better sustained performance. So all around, it's a superior phone as a phone. However, if you're tired of a brick, you're tired of these heavy, massive phones. Come on, bro, give me something light. Give me something I can handle day to day, but doesn't give me a tiny screen. You're going to go with the iPhone Air. You're going to be extremely happy with this phone. Also, you're going to feel like I could finally put a case on it and it's still not heavy. That's going to be this phone right here. So this device is extremely appealing to a certain subset of people. And it's still in its infancy. The only thing I think you might have is a little bit of buyer remorse if you buy this right now and then they launch a dual camera version and you wanted that ultra wide. If you don't care, just go for it right now. You're going to be pretty happy overall. So that's it for me between these two phones. They've been quite the joy to use, both of them. And I don't think you can go wrong either way. I just think that you can make a mistake if you don't buy based on your needs. between these two. You will be returning if you get the error thinking that it's going to be amazing battery or it's good enough and you were expecting really good battery and that's your main point. You're probably going to be returning because you're going to say, this is not as good as I needed. If you get the max thinking, oh, I can handle that size, and you really needed a lighter, thinner phone, you're going to be like, this thing's an absolute brick. I should have listened to that video. But anyway, if you have any other questions, comments, concerns, drop them down below. If you found this video entertaining, I'm sure you'll find this one entertaining as well. And I'll catch you all in the next episode. Nick here. Be sure to be well, and peace.